All right, good afternoon, everybody. We're a couple of minutes past the hour. Figure we can go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone to coming out to Coastal Industry Week this week, y'all. This is our fourth and final webinar session. We've got Mr. Shane Faust of CPRA's Engineering Division. He's going to talk to you about our coastal vegetative planning program. Just before I give it over to him, I wanted to make a couple opening remarks about just housekeeping and logistics. In the event of any questions, feel free to type them into the chat box. I'll be monitoring those as Shane presents. And we should have some time towards the end. We have an hour-long slot, and we did build in some time for a general Q&A at the end. If we don't get to them immediately, we can definitely get to them towards the end there. I guess without further ado, y'all, appreciate it, and I'm going to kick it over to Shane.
All right, well, thank you, Jacques, and thank everybody for tuning in to this presentation. If I'm not mistaken, this will be the last presentation for Coastal Week. My name is Shane Faust. I work for CPRA, and today we're going to talk about Louisiana's coastal vegetative planting programs. I've always described vegetative plantings as the icing on the cake. It's normally the last part of any construction project, and it plays a vital role in not only slowing down coastal erosion, but also protecting our investment. And so today we're going to kind of go over, there's a few, 2 to 3 programs that we use to do vegetative plantings, and go over some what we like to do here at CPRA and also what other programs have been doing. So with that, just a little statistics and some information here for you. You know, Louisiana contains 40% of the continental United States wetland acreage. And these wetlands, they protect against storm surge, energy, and flooding by using the marsh grasses, trees, and soils working as a system. Wetlands are divided into 2 main categories, which is forested wetlands and marshes. And the marshes being broken down into freshwater, intermediate, brackish, and saltwater. And I have those highlighted because we're going to this presentation will focus on the brackish and saltwater, because that's what we deal with the most here at CPRA. So, you know, the benefit of these wetlands are flood and storm protection. They just act as natural sponges absorbing floodwaters, and they hold back these floodwaters and they slow the rate. The water enters either the rivers or the bayous, which reduces the severity of downstream flooding. This is a map of the distribution of the wetlands across our coastal zone. I'm assuming the colors are okay on y'all's computer, but the light blue is our brackish and the red is our saltwater. And again, this is where we focus most of our projects. So overall, we cannot talk about vegetative plantings without first talking about the Golden Meadow Plants Material Center. It's located in Galliano, Louisiana. And one of the things they do, and they do specifically for us, is identify and evaluate plant species for coastal erosion control, marsh restoration, and dune stabilization. Back in the late 80s, they also helped develop the planting specifications that ensures that we have quality plants currently used on our projects. These plants are proven effective in reducing soil erosion and promoting reestablishment of native vegetation. They are vital to our restoration efforts. And to get into a little bit more of what they do for us, so they do these what they call coastal vegetation releases. And basically all that means is that they collect, test, and then vegetatively reproduce plants, and which gives us a more quality and more consistent plant. And basically all that means is when you put it out there and plant, it's going to work. It's going to grow and it's going to create the marshes. And that helps us because it keeps the contractors from collecting plants from the marsh, because you don't want to destroy marsh to create marsh. And then it ensures a quality plant that has been vegetatively reproduced. A lot of these seeds that they produce are not viable. I don't know what the statistic is, but most of these plants we're using, you're talking they have a less than 40% rate. So, this is just some parameters. Let me go back one, because I didn't really even. So some of the releases are the California bulrush, which is to the far right, and that's mainly for our freshwater marsh. Then you have smooth core, marsh hay cordgrass, black mangrove, seashore paspalum, which is for our brackish marshes, and then you have sea oats, bitter panicum, and the Gulf bluestone, which are all your saltwater marsh / dune type species. And so here's basically just a kind of a parameter, I guess you would call it, where in the first column here, I'm showing their salt tolerance. You know, if you look at this, I guess 35 parts per thousand is considered seawater. So that's the max it can be. So as you can see, the smooth core, the black mangrove, sea oats, things like that, it can take a lot of tolerance, whereas the other ones are pretty much the brackish marsh. They can take some, but they can't take as much. So this all goes into when you're picking out plants to plant on your particular project, on these are the levels of salt that they can take. Same thing, the next one over is the upper and lower elevations that these plants can be planted at. You know, your dune species, which is like your sea oats, your bitter panicum, they can go really, really high. And your smooth cores can go, smooth cordgrass can go pretty low at a -12 inches. So, and then I also added in what CPRA has been seeing over the past year or so on prices, and this is an installed price. Now, depending on the species that is picked, you know, smooth cordgrass grows way quicker and is easier for a planter to grow than, say, a sea oats or a black mangrove. And that's why you see the different, I guess, in planting terms, a major difference in price between, say, $3 and $10. Some plants take longer to grow. And I guess it'd be well noted that smooth cordgrass and black mangrove are the only two species that can actually be submerged. So this slide, basically, we're going to go over just general planting information for growers, for contractors, for people who are just interested. And there are two planting seasons. You have spring, which is March, April, and May, and you have the fall, which is September, October, and November. If you miss one, you obviously plant the other one. Planting contractors, they need at least 3 to 6 months to grow these plants out. Again, like I was saying earlier, mangrove takes way longer to grow than, say, smooth cordgrass. All of our nurseries that do business with, at least with CPRA, they must be located in Louisiana. We must use Louisiana native species. Visiting the project site to assess the native vegetation and the site conditions, in my opinion, is essential. And that's because choosing the right species is important. I think at times there are preconceived notions on what people want to plant when they're designing projects. And when you go out to the site and look at it, if black mangrove is not growing out there, it's probably a reason for that. And it's probably not going to grow even if you introduce it. Be adaptable depending on the site conditions. What that means is when you're talking marsh creation projects, A lot of times these projects can last a year or more. If cell A was constructed as soon as the project starts, and then cell B was constructed at the end of the project, cell A may have native vegetation that came up on its own. So when you go out there, you may have to either move the location of where you were going to plant or tighten up your spacing and make them a little bit closer together. Know the site conditions and that they are usually remote, and access to the sites normally require a shallow draft boat. Now, anyone who's been out in the marsh in Louisiana probably knows this, but add to that, a lot of the CPRA projects have over 100,000 plants. And so if you have 100,000 4-inch pots, obviously you're adding a lot of weight. So make sure that you know what you're getting into and that most of our projects are very remote. Bird abatement may be necessary, especially on our Barry Island type projects. And then vegetative plantings, they go through the same bidding process, at least for CPRA, as the construction process. So as a rule for me, whenever the construction portion of the project starts is when I start the bidding process for vegetative plantings, meaning start developing plans and specs, get all the approvals that you need, the reviews, and then bid them out and slowly but surely get a NTP in place. And this also helps the potential growers know what's coming so that they can plan to have those quantities available if they're going to bid the project.
Hey, Shane.
Planting specifications.
Shane, Jock here,
Yeah.
real quick. We got a question in the chat. Leron Tagger, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, asked, will airboats be allowed in the marsh to assist with planting projects, especially due to their remoteness?
Most of the time, the answer to that is yes. It depends on the landowner, but I would say 90% of the time, airboats are usually allowed, and you'll see later. I have some slides that show, methods of planting that show airboats. So, yes, most of the time, but it depends on the landowner and their restrictions. All right, so
Appreciate it, Shane.
no problem. All right, so specifications. A successful planting project begins with detailed plant specifications, mandatory pre-construction site visit, and regular nursery inspections. Some of the things that we include in our specifications are things like how and when are we going to salt harden these plants if they need to be salt hardened? What types of soils / planting mediums can be used? The plant heights, the number of stems, root growth, and I have it, italicized and highlighted here because, in my opinion, the root growth is the most important specification areas. If you have a very good root system, then this is going to give the plant a higher probability of success once it's out of the nursery environment. Plant sizes, is it going to be plugs? Is it going to be 4-inch containers or gallons? How are you going to transport it? If and when do you have to prune them? These and many, many other things is what really is going to set your project up for success. So these are types of vegetative plantings that CPRA deals with most, and that's what I'm focused on. We have marsh creation, barrier islands, and terracing. Here at CPRA, our projects tend to be large in scale, be it hundreds of acres or miles of beaches. And I get this question all the time when people say, how many plants do I need to plant for X amount of acres? And my answer is always, what's your budget? Fit your planting to your budget. You can go robust or you can go more sparse. The difference is, do you want to see a completed, what everyone thinks of a marsh when they think of a marsh, at the end of your planting, or do you want to spread them out and let them grow together, and a year later have that fully grown marsh? And then I guess another thing to think about too is if you have a rather large budget, you may not want to plant so many plants where it eats up your budget, for the reason that we do have hurricanes, there is droughts, there could be certain diseases that take your plants out. So you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket and plant your entire budget year one, and then a hurricane comes through and wipe them all out. You may want to spread that out over 1, 2, 3, or even 5 years. So, marsh creation projects. Normally, this is how I go about planting any kind of marsh creation project. Number one, and I'm gonna, of the 3 different veg plantings that we're gonna talk about, I'm gonna hammer this down. Match the native species. I said this earlier, if you go out there and there's no smooth core, you're probably not gonna wanna plant smooth core. So earth and containment dikes. You want to plant those right after construction. The earth and containment dikes are pretty easy. They're overall, I like to plant smooth core grass on the outside of the containment dike at the mean water level, because smooth core likes to be wet sometimes and to be dry sometimes. And normally, and again, this is dependent on budget, I like to plant 3-foot centers, and if you have more than one row, the rows 3 foot apart, but that can be spread out. You're either going to get them grow together really fast, or it's going to take a little time for them all to go together. And then on the top of the crown, I like to plant seashore paspalum. It's a wonderful grass that is very salt tolerant and spreads really quickly. And again, I like to plant these 3-foot centers, rows 3 foot apart. They'll come together really good. And then at this point, you have both 2 levels of defense. You're going to have the smooth core grass in the front of the dike, knocking down wave energy. And then you're going to have the paspalum on top that's probably going to go down the sides and hold that. Those roots are going to hold in those soils in case the wave energy gets past your first thing. And you'll get to see that in the slide, 1 or 2 slides next. Now, the newly created marsh, or the marsh fill. So because our projects are sometimes, or most of them are, have to be maintained for 20 years. They have to be over-engineered, meaning that marsh fill is going to be at a +3 or a +4 because of a 20-year lifespan. It's going to settle, and at a certain point on that settlement curve, it's going to hit exactly where you want it to be. Well, that +3 or +4 is not a good elevation for these plants that we're talking about. So normally what we do is we plant the containment dike to hold in the dike and to get that newly created marsh that's in between the dikes to settle to an elevation that we want. Once it gets to that elevation, there's probably going to be some emergent vegetation come up. You come back, and then you'll plant probably some marsh hay. And anywhere there are bald spots or Mother Nature hasn't taken over. And again, I like to do that on 5-foot centers, 5-foot rows. It comes down to your actual budget. So here's what some of the planting methods I was talking about. As you can see, it's dirty work. You're going to get wet. Sometimes if you look at this far right picture, the containment dike is what he's planting has settled and it's gotten hard. They may need to use augers to get in there to drill the holes to put the plants in. But overall, all plantings for us are hand planted, and it's tough work. This is just a completed planting we did out at Bayou DuPont. You look at the far left picture, That was right after it was installed in June 2010. If you look at the middle, that was a few months later. In September, you can see that the smooth core that is in the water is growing and thriving. And as I said earlier, that containment dike, and I think that's me in the background, but that containment dike, the past palum, I planted the crown, and it's spreading great. And then if you look in October, a month later, you basically have a fully functioning marsh. Exactly what you're looking for. Barrier Island projects. Match the vegetation. Always. You can plant the dune and beach immediately after construction. I got to give a shout out to Baron Lee, who does a lot of our monitoring on these Barrier Island projects. We've done a lot of these, and we've done different configurations on how we plant them. And he has came up with an outstanding, more effective way to plant. And so there's normally on a barrier island, because there's so much moving sand, a sand fence installed, which captures that sand and then creates this dune. If you look at this picture, the white part of that, hopefully you can see this, but the white part, this is the sand fence going down the middle, and then this is the dune up in here. So the first one or even two rows we're going to plant at the toe of this this dune. And you want that to be a mix of bitter panicum and sea oats, and plant it on 2.5 foot centers. You want them a little bit tighter, and they grow together much better. All these dune type plants love to be covered by sand, and the more they're covered, the more they grow. So if you put them in those first two rows, you will establish a really nice row or two of vegetation that's going to hold in all this sand that's being captured by the sand fence. And then we usually will plant those about, if you have more than one row, 10 foot apart. And then in front of those two rows, on the front side, we usually use bitter panicum, and those actually can be planted on 5 foot centers and rows 10 foot apart. In the back, again, at the dune toe, you want that mix of bitter panicum and sea oats, and then you can start working your way back towards the marsh. And for diversity, you can plant blue stem, drop seed, marsh hay, and all those can be on, 10 foot centers, 5 foot apart. And because barrier island plantings are a very harsh environment, we require a slow release nitrogen fertilizer tablet to put in there to give them some nutrients to help them establish those roots. Again, this is some pictures of them actually installing the stuff. Again, hand planted. The challenge here is getting your equipment out there. But once your equipment is out there and on site, normally it's a lot easier to plant than, say, a marsh planting where you saw the slide earlier where they're in the water, they're in mud. Here you can walk it, and it's way quicker, way easier to plant, and you don't have to do as much. And it's rare we put any kind of limitations. And again, it's come back to the earlier question on equipment. So most of the time it comes down to the landowner and if they have any restrictions. But as you see in this far left picture, there's a tractor out there with, pulling the plants around. He actually dug a row to put them in, and they'll come back and cover those things up. This is Bejo Eyes, August 2009, right after the plants were installed. To the right, you're looking at a year later, it's all grown up nice and pretty. And then there's terracing. To me, terracing is basically the same as earth and containment dikes. You want to match the species, and granted, you may not have a species that has come up on your terrace, but you at least want to look around and see what else is growing out there. And they can be planted directly after construction is complete. And again, just like the earth and containment dikes, I like to plant smooth core at the mean water line all the way around the terrace, put some paspalum on top, 3 foot centers, 3 foot apart. And in the rare occurrence, as you see at the last bullet point there, you find freshwater wetlands or freshwater marshes. Bullwhip is an amazing species that will grow really quickly and hold these terraces in for a very long time. Again, it's kind of very similar to the earth and containment dike plantings. You're going to get wet. It's dirty work. It's all done by hand. Then here is some pictures of the Sabine terraces. The left side is May of 1990. The right side is May of 2000, almost 10 years later. And as you can see, that red dotted line outlined, that particular cell basically filled in after the plantings. And a lot of them, you can see a lot of growth throughout. Now we get to nurseries. These are some really good pictures that I've hand chosen, but you never know what you get with nurseries. We do not dictate means and methods. I've been to nurseries where they're growing them in ditches, they're growing them in pea rows, but as long as the plant is a healthy, vibrant plant and it meets our specifications, don't really care how they're grown. You know, these here are pretty and look like lows that you're used to, but these nurseries are essential to growing plants to meet our specifications. And these guys have a substantial investment in the growing, the weeding, the storing of these plants. Like I said earlier in the presentation, some of our CPRA projects are 100, 200,000 plants. Now, when they pot these things, they need a lot of room to put all these plants and to have them ready to be able to be transported to the site. And then most of these growers, they actually install the plants also. And there are a few that sub it out, but they usually install it also. Now, CPRA does a lot of their own planting, but there's also a couple other programs / projects out there that I'd like to hit on. And one of them being the CWPPRA planting project, which is LA 39. And that was a PPL 20 project, and it was approved for $10.8 million over a 20-year lifespan. Now, this is CWPPRA's approach to a large-scale vegetative plantings, and they average about 50 to 60,000 plants at 3 to 4 sites annually. The sites are monitored for 10 years. This is the 12th year of that program. And as of the end of last year, they have spent $8.7 million. Now, the goal here was to plant for 10 years, have 10 years of projects, and then monitor for the rest of those 10 years. But they've come under budget, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, they've gone back to CWPPRA and been approved to keep planting until they think that they have enough plants where the money left can be all to monitoring. And then this one I'm really passionate about. This is a small vegetative planting program that is a cooperative agreement between CPRA, NRCS, and the Louisiana Department of Ag and Forestry. And their goal is to identify smaller local areas that have needs of planting. They average about 50,000 plants covering about 40 miles annually. It's the 36th year of this program. CPRA oversees and funds the program to a tune of currently $400,000 a year. NRCS provides technical support, which includes things like equipment, offices, know-how, the knowledge. And then the heart of this whole program is LDAF, and they go through their districts and they not only assess potential sites, they obtain landowners permissions, they implement and then they monitor these projects. And they do this with like 5 to 6 employees with the help of some volunteers. And this is just one example of landowners, local, state, and federal agencies working together. And I can't say enough about this program. Oh, so for those of you that know me, and you know that I am a huge fisherman and I'm a huge duck hunter. So with that, one of the reasons that this is important, besides the mission that we're all trying to do and slow down the coastal erosion, is it also helps 75% of the finfish and the shellfish use our wetlands for various reasons, whether it's spawning, nursery habitat. And then 5 million migratory waterfowl depend on these wetlands. So with all that said, that I'd like to mention that over all of these, I'd like to mention that the cost of plant vegetation versus the benefit gained, at least in my opinion, is a no-brainer. That any project, whether it's a barrier island project, whether it's marsh creation, or it's a terrace, it should have some form of vegetative plantings on it. And with that, I will take any other questions that y'all may have.
Yeah, good job, Shane. Lots of thorough information on something that, as Rudy mentioned earlier in the week, and I think I mentioned it too, doesn't always get a lot of the spotlight here for what we do, but definitely important. And I like your icing on the cake analogy earlier too.
Oh, yeah.
Let's see here. Not exactly a question, but C Lun 1 put in the chat, glad we're planting native species.
Yeah, I think I think I got this email the other day. There's even a bill in the Senate right now that says that we have to use native species, which we do anyway.
Good deal. And so the same attendee from earlier that had asked the question about access asked another one. As a marsh eco contractor, what do you recommend we do to get involved in this work or other upcoming work?
Gotcha. So there's a process, and I don't know if you were tuned into the first presentation of this series that Rudy gave on how to do work with the state, but you need to go to our website, and I don't actually have that all pulled up, but you need to go to our website and apply to be a contractor with the state of Louisiana. And then at that point, you will be notified of any kind of projects that you're interested in, say vegetative plantings. They will send you out an email, and then at that point you decide if you want to bid it, and you submit a bid. I think I mentioned earlier, because we are the state, all of our projects are bid out, and it will go to the lowest bidder. So that would be the first thing. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah.
Yeah, Shane, good job answering that one, and I'll throw out to the person who asked the question too. Definitely encourage you to go back and review all the technical webinars, but in particular the one given on Tuesday by Rudy Semino. He's our division chief in engineering, and he gave a pretty thorough update on the different types of contracting we have out there. I'm about to put into the chat box a couple of other resources for you. But yeah, this is fresh. If you want to review some of these webinars and get an idea of that, as well as the industry briefings we had earlier this week, not only can you get an idea of the different contracting avenues that we have available, but also the different projects that are going to be headed towards a hopeful construction scenario. And I think I understand your question, and that maybe the vegetative planting thing is kind of mostly in line with the type of work you would offer. What the industry briefing info would give you would be an idea of when things are going to be hitting the landscape, when future projects are going to get constructed.
Yeah, and to add to that, Jacques, so if you do go in and look at that and you see all these projects coming up, I would say 90% of them have vegetative plantings on them. And they're, and you know, once they're built, we will be planting them.
Yeah, so to the other question, will the slides from this week be made available? Yeah, that's the plan. We're collecting all the presentations, the video recordings, PDFs of the presentations that were given throughout this week. We're packaging them all up right now. And I'm thinking sometime next week, maybe towards the end of the week or so, our outreach folks are going to have them housed in a certain location on our website or posted up to a Vimeo, an account or something like that we have, and you can go and access everything like that. And to the same person and anyone else in attendance, if you're interested in just kind of getting a pulse on other projects going on, not just CPRA projects, you can access a resource called the Coastal Technical Assistance Center. I'm putting that in the chat box as well. This is a partnership effort with CPRA and the Louisiana Economic Development. Basically, it's just a portal to kind of try and centralize everything going on that's associated with coastal work. Definitely encourage you to look at that website. There's all kinds of resources in there, and I believe Lacey Malawson, who's the director of it all, she sends out a pretty helpful newsletter, things like that. Yeah, no problem. Thank you for attending. Just making sure I got the right email, website in there. There you go. Well, we'll maybe give a couple more minutes, Shane, before we totally wrap up. But for everyone who's here listening and anyone who may be listening to this recording in the future, we hope to see you next year in the springtime during Coastal Industry Week. Lots of fun events occurred this week that I know I'm personally already looking forward to next week. Whether it be industry briefings, more technical webinars, or other networking sessions. So usually sometime in the spring in conjunction with what's called Coastal Day at the Legislature. Appreciate it, Patty. All right, everybody, I guess we'll go ahead and conclude. And we'll plan to see y'all around next year for next year's Coastal Industry Week. Y'all have a good weekend.